There was a time, not so long ago in the grand clockwork of human history, when knowledge wasn't stored in servers or in books, but in fields and seeds, soil, and the hands of farmers who knew how to survive on what they could grow. And yet, much of that knowledge has vanished, not in fire or flood, but through silence. Forgotten not because it was unworthy, but because it did not fit the new machinery of progress. Among the ruins of medieval villages and the margins of illuminated manuscripts lie traces of a vanished agricultural intelligence and nutritional code written in roots and leaves now lost to time. One of the first clues comes not from a grand castle or cathedral, but from a quiet, sweet-tasting root, skirt, a name almost lost to language itself. Slim, white, twisted like buried string, skirt was once a crown jewel of medieval cuisine. It was the rare kind of plant that needed no pampering. Once planted, it multiplied underground, like nature's hidden vault of nourishment, forgotten by modern agriculture for its slow growth and strange shape. Skirt held something more precious than speed, stability. It thrived in poor soil. It didn't demand constant care. It fed both the starving peasant and the overfed noble. Records show it appeared on royal tables, its sweetness rivaling that of parsnips or carrots, but its true power was its resilience. In the biting cold of winter, when most crops surrendered to frost, skirt remained quiet, alive, waiting. What happened to it? Why did we trade this quiet, enduring root for more uniform crops? Perhaps skirt was too honest, too humble for a world increasingly obsessed with appearance. Or maybe it was never lost. Perhaps it's still hiding, not in the earth, but in memory. As skirt faded, another plant crept up from the shadows of Roman roads and monastery gardens. Alexander's, it didn't stay neatly in place like other garden herbs. It spread wildly coastal cliffs, hedgerows, roadside ruins, the kind of plant that refused to be domesticated. Its boldness made it both nuisance and delicacy. The leaves, stalks, seeds, flowers, roots, every part was edible. Its flavor was strange, like celery that had lived too many lives. And it fed generations. Medieval farmers didn't plant Alexander's for beauty. They planted it because it offered everything: a famine vegetable, a spice when pepper ran dry, an early spring green when scurvy threatened. It was, in many ways, a miracle. But the miracle proved inconvenient. It wouldn't stay in lines. It wouldn't behave. When celery arrived, more tender, more refined, Alexander's was cast aside. Yet to this day, it grows along Britain's forgotten roads, as if still waiting to be remembered. And then, there's a name that sounds like legend: Good King Henry. No royal lineage, no known origin, just a plant so dependable it earned mythic status. It grew on its own, year after year, without seed or ceremony. It fed the hungry in times of blight. It healed the sick, iron-rich, vitamin-dense. Its early leaves saved lives when famine swept Europe. And its roots, boiled into teas, were a gentle medicine for the poor. They called it all good in some regions, a name to plain from modern supermarkets, but true to ignore. And yet, like skirt, Good King Henry vanished from our gardens. Was it the rise of commercial monoculture that made this plant unwelcome? Or something deeper, an amnesia of usefulness, where we began to distrust anything that didn't arrive polished and shrink-wrapped? But not all forgotten vegetables were humble. Some masqueraded as delicacies. Salsify, the root that tasted of oysters, a curious chameleon of flavor. Imagine pulling a root from frozen ground, roasting it, and tasting the sea. For monks and fasting peasants who could not touch meat or fish, salsify became salvation. Monastery records from the 1400s show it grown not as a novelty, but as a staple. Kinds graced medieval gardens, white and black, both long and gnarled, hidden beneath a skin so dark it dared you to look twice. But beneath that exterior, sweetness, complexity, nutrition, and above all, longevity. Salsify could survive the freeze, store for months, and emerge as a feast when other food was gone. But like so many ancient foods, its fate was sealed not by failure, but by optics: slow growing, unusual looking, and unfamiliar to industrial agriculture. The same could be said of the medlar, a fruit so bizarre it defies classification. Imagine an apple with a bottom that looks unfinished. Its flesh is bitter, hard, inedible until it rots. But when it rots, a process called bledding, it transforms, sweet, cinnamon-like, like applesauce streamed by someone on the edge of starvation and salvation. Medieval Europe waited weeks for medlars to become edible. That kind of patience no longer fits in our world. But medlars once meant survival. They ripen late, last of the season. First taste of winter sweetness. Their open-bottomed shape earned them ribald nicknames too crude to repeat here. But their presence was sacred. They whispered of autumns. And winter's coming died in a very different way. Chickweed never needed an invitation. It simply appeared in pots, gardens, cracks, and stone. Chickweed didn't wait to be planted. It arrived and fed whoever noticed. Medieval peasants knew its power. Rich in vitamin C, cooling to the skin, gentle in tea, it cured, it nourished. It filled in the gaps when cultivated crops failed. Its modern fate: declared a weed, sprayed, burned, removed, a plant that once fed entire communities now seen as an inconvenience. But who declared it worthless, and on what grounds? Names can betray. Scorzonera, for instance, sounds more like a plague than a plant. Yet this black-skinned root was prized in monastery gardens. Early herbalists believed it cured snake bites. It didn't, but it cured hunger, and that's more than most miracles ever do. Sweeter than salsify. Stored in monastic texts, Scorzonera stayed edible in storage until summer. Its decline came not from failure, but refrigeration. Why bury roots in sand when you can stock shelves with plastic? And still, wisdom persisted. In a plant called the Welsh onion, which is neither Welsh nor a true onion. A humble impostor from East Asia, smuggled into European gardens by trade and time. Its genius was endurance. Once planted, it split endlessly, feeding families for years without ever asking for more. It thrived in frost, and asked for little. It gave much. In a world where food meant life or death, Welsh onions were a quiet assurance. Yet supermarkets preferred the showier, larger bulbed onions, and so another miracle faded. In the crumbling manuscripts of forgotten herbalists and the frost-lined walls of abandoned manors, there remains one more whisper of survival. See beet, before chard, before spinach. Before kale wore its crown in modern markets, there was this wild ancestor, a coastal sentinel, hardy, wine-bitten. It grew along salt-blasted shores, enduring storms where nothing else dared to root. Medieval households knew its leaves well. Bitter, yes, but brimming with minerals. Sea beet was no comfort food, it was real food. The kind that kept you standing when plagues swept towns and rains failed crops. Its descendants fill our kitchens today, but the original, lost to convenience, tamed into something softer. But somewhere, along European coasts, it still clings to rock and sea. Waiting rampion follows like a legend, no more today from fairy tales than fields. Rapunzel. They called it, yes, that Rapunzel. A root so valued it sparked myths of locked towers and stolen greens. In truth, it was a real crop. A tangle of tender roots and delicate greens, mild, nutty, nourishing. Rampion was a dual gift, leaf and root. Above and below, farmers grew it. In cottage plots, monks and cloistered gardens. It vanished with the rise of watercress and cultivated lettuce, faster, more uniform. Rampion was none of these. But it was alive in a way modern greens are not. It was survival in story. Form. A memory you could chew. And then there's fat hen, a name that draws snickers today. But once meant the difference between famine and feast. It grew like defiance in poor soil. Sprouting without care, high in protein, rich in iron. Its leaves were used like spinach, its seeds ground into porridge. In medieval Europe, fat hen covered fields where wheat had failed. It was the last line of defense. A food of desperation, yes, but also of intelligence. You didn't choose fat hen, it chose you. It appeared when you needed it most. Now, like chickweed, it's called the weed. But the only thing criminal about fat hen is how we forgot it. Among the last to vanish was mallow. Soft leaves, mucilaginous, healing, a plant for empty stomachs and inflamed skin. Its name appears again and again in monastery records, not as luxury, but as lifeline. Mallow soothed, it thickened broths, it wrapped wounds. A medieval multi-tool, shaped like a weed and valued like gold. Its fate, swallowed by modern medicine and processed foods. The wild was replaced by the lab. But mallow never left. It just faded into the background, quiet, green, generous. And finally, the field bean, not the pretty green bean of summer barbecues. No, this was the fava, the broad bean, a medieval protein powerhouse. Dried, stored, cooked into stews thick enough to feed families for days. It was peasant meat. It built bones, strengthened hearts, carried armies, inspired revolts, but it also carried danger. In rare cases, a genetic condition called favism made it fatal. And so, fear crept in, stories grew, myths of poison, of curse. By the Enlightenment, the field bean was slowly edged out, replaced by safer, blander cousins. But for centuries, it was the backbone of survival. A bean worth risking for. 15 plants, 15 lifelines, all nearly gone. Not because they failed us, but because we failed to remember. We traded complexity for control, patience for packaging, resilience for replication. But in doing so, we lost more than food. We lost stories. We lost languages whispered through leaves and passed down in soil-stained hands. We lost an entire intelligence rooted not in data, but in dirt. And maybe it's time to remember, not as nostalgia, not as novelty, but as necessity, because the next famine won't wait for plastic. The next collapse won't come with a label. In that moment, these forgotten vegetables, these medieval superfoods may become something more than memory. They may become salvation. But some plants didn't just feed the body, they fed the story. Enter Ramson's wild garlic. A plant so potent, so fiercely aromatic, it could be smelled before it was seen. Monks once banned it from cloisters for fear it would stir impure thoughts. And yet, for the common folk, it was purity itself, cleansing, invigorating. Bursting through forest floors in early spring like green fire, Ramsons didn't need a fence. or a garden bed. They belonged to the wilderness and to anyone desperate enough to seek them, rich in sulfur compounds, vitamin C, and antimicrobial power. They weren't just food, they were protection. Protection from infection, from starvation, from scurvy. When the forest turned green again after a long, gray winter, ramsons were the sign. Life had returned. You had survived. Not far behind them came mallow, soft and unassuming, but with the secret gift, mucilage. That strange, healing slipperiness that soothed sore throats and upset stomachs. Medieval doctors prized it, so did the poor. Its roots made a mild tea, its leaves thickened soups. Even its flowers offered gentle healing. The ancient Egyptians used mallow, the Greeks wrote odes to it, and yet, in today's world, it's seen as nothing more than an ornamental weed. How did we forget what they once knew? That food was medicine, and medicine was not a pill, but a petal. And then there's sea beet, the wild ancestor of modern chard and beetroot. Hardy, salt-tolerant, forged in the wine-beaten cliffs of coastal Europe, sea beet didn't bend to the rules of farming. It grew where the ocean met the land, pulling minerals from the sea air and packing them into its dark green leaves. Long before grocery aisles offered superfoods, medieval villagers knew where to find them hidden in tidewash rocks and forgotten marshes. Sea beet was one of the earliest domesticated greens. But its wild form remained even more potent, rich in iron, magnesium, and resilience. It wasn't just what it gave, it was how it gave, without demand, without supervision. A gift from the edge of the world, but perhaps the most haunting of all is Fat Hench on a Podium album. A name more likely to be cursed than praised today. A weed, they say, a nuisance, and yet, during medieval famines, fat hen saved lives. Its seeds were ground into flour, its leaves cooked like spinach. High in calcium, protein, and folate, the so-called weed was a full meal hiding in plain sight. Archaeological finds show fat hen in human settlements going back 6,000 years. But like many things essential, it grew too easily, too freely, and so was discarded as common, as if effort, not nourishment, made something worthy. We didn't just forget the plants. We forgot the values. We replaced survival with spectacle, diversity with uniformity, nourishment with novelty. And perhaps the most chilling truth, these superfoods didn't vanish. We erased them. We paved over the fields where they grew wild. We bred the bitterness out of them, the quirks, the patience they required. We taught ourselves that real food comes only from a shelf, not from a hedge or a ditch or the corner of an old stone wall. But what if that's where the truth still waits? In the cracks, in the silence, in the places we stopped looking because the soil remembers, the seeds remember, and maybe, just maybe, we can remember too. So, the next time you walk an overgrown path or glimpse a strange plant curling in the corner of your garden, ask yourself, is this just a weed? Or is it a whisper from the past, an invitation to remember what we've forgotten? The real superfoods are not invented in labs. They are the ghost of what once sustained us. And they are still here, if we're willing to see them. They fed a forgotten world, and they might just save ours. If this story stirred something and you don't let it vanish, like, share, and subscribe, and help bring the past back to life, because sometimes the roots of our future lie buried in the dirt of history.